Frosh, transfer from Illinois at fullback. I was kind of skeptical when I saw him come in to Auburn. This was before the offensive coordinator hire had been made, and I was wondering why did we need a fullback? Auburn, not the type of team that runs an offense that would utilize a fullback, which him coming in kind of suggests to me that maybe they're trying to get back more to that traditional type of offense. But by all accounts, this guy's going to be a force. And, you don't talk about fullbacks a whole lot, but how important is having a guy like that? I mean, could that be a difference maker for protecting the quarterback or helping out these young running backs?
I think it could be extremely important in the running game, especially if you can get some of the younger guys to cut up in the middle, because Auburn, especially for the last couple of years and with the talent they have now, they're going to be more prone to stretching it outside and trying to use their speed to get to the corners and gain some big yards. But if you can occasionally go right up the middle, and you've got this huge guy blowing up a hole, I think that you could have more plays, more big plays up the middle than you could outside this year.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm very interested to see him. Definitely, I don't want to say he reminds me of Heath Evans. Heath Evans was much more of an actual ball carrier. I don't think you'll see Jay Prosh getting a lot of carries. But
right.
There's just something about having a big fullback that that can go up there and bust some linebackers. That's exciting stuff to think about. But David, now I think we've got to talk about the elephant in the room here on offense, and that is the offensive line for Auburn. Lots of question marks. Lots of question marks.
Really young, but if you look at them, they're incredibly deep. One of the things that we talk about with almost every team in the SEC so far has been lack of depth on the offensive line. I really don't think that's one of Auburn's problems.
No, it's not. There's just a lot of youth. I think probably the leader of the offensive line is a sophomore, Reese Dismukes at center. He was all-SEC freshman last year. Kind of stumbled his way through the season, started every game. It's extremely difficult to do that as a center, especially when you're a freshman. So I think you'll see him kind of come in at a different level this year. John Sullen at left guard, another guy with some experience. So there's two experienced guys you can rely on. At right tackle, you'll probably be looking at Chad Slade, who, to be honest with you, is kind of a gap fill type of guy. He's not necessarily a top flight SEC starter. But then the other two positions, I think there's no question that you're going to have true freshmen starting at left tackle and at right guard. Left tackle is probably going to be Greg Robinson, who has a lot of hype around him as well. Very big guy, very athletic guy. I'm not quite so worried about him as I am who's going to play at right guard. It's kind of come down to a two-man race between Christian Westerman and Alex Kozan. I kind of expected it to be Westerman. He was a much more highly rated recruit, but it does make me a little bit nervous having to start two true freshmen on the offensive line.
And that's got to be scary, especially when you start coming up against defensive lines like LSU, Arkansas. You've got to play a Georgia defensive front seven who's one of the best in the country. I mean, that's got to be a concern for you, at least once you get later in the year. But Mississippi State, Clemson, they're still going to be athletic up front. You have them first two games. So they're going to learn a lot early.
Absolutely. They're going to have a quick learning curve, and I think some of it's going to be put on offensive coordinator Scott Loeffler as well to try to figure out ways to minimize, those holes, if you will. And I don't know. I don't know how much you could do that when you have some other question marks on offense as well. There's just a lot of things that could go right or go wrong for Auburn on offense. A lot of very unproven quantities that are going to have to be figured out. Let's go to the other side of the ball now. Let's talk about defense. Auburn brought in a home run hire as a defensive coordinator, Brian Van Gorder, who was previously the defensive coordinator with the Atlanta Falcons. We talked a little bit before the show. You're a little bit worried about the defense. Personally, I think the defense is going to be stronger than the offense this year, which may surprise a lot of people based on the past couple of years of Auburn's defensive performance. But I'm firmly on the Van Gorder mustache train. I got to be honest.
Now, I believe you've got the right coordinator. I think that he's going to come in there, he's going to get his system installed, and it's going to be successful. I just don't think it's going to be this year. Too many holes in the linebacking core. I want to see where people are going to step up and fill those. And the secondary, who just was burnt toast last year, didn't get a whole lot better. I think the front seven might be okay. You're going to have a couple linebacking holes, but I think once you get past that, outside of the defensive line, it gets really scary at that point.
I'll give you linebackers. We got issues there. We definitely need somebody to step up at middle linebacker. That guy needs to be Jake Holland, who had some injury issues last year. But in this defense that Van Gorder is running, the middle linebacker is making changes and making calls, and he's got to be able to do that and get everybody lined up, or there's no way this defense is going to work. So that's a big question mark. Darren Bates at outside linebacker, he's improved quite a bit. Actually led the team in tackles last year. I think that's the one guy at linebacker you can depend on. The other side, kind of a battle at this point between Jonathan Evans and Justin Garrett. Maybe throw Chris Frost in there too, who's a very highly rated recruit, but that's definitely a question mark at that side. You don't really have a great option there. Defensive line, I think, could be one of the better ones in the SEC this year. You have Corey Lemonier, who's made some All-SEC teams last year. Very good pass rusher, needs to work on his rush defense. But I think a guy who may be even better than Corey Lemonier is Dee Ford. He has really put on a lot of weight since he's come into Auburn. He came in at like 240 when he was a freshman, and he's up to like 280 or 290 now. Very athletic guy. Got hurt pretty much the middle of the season last year, didn't get to play anymore, but that's a guy I'm very excited to watch.
Dee Ford is pretty amazing. I'd also watch Gabe Wright. He's another defensive tackle who is just amazingly quick for being 305 pounds. It's really kind of extraordinary. It kind of makes you think about Nick Fairley when you see him. I mean, he gets to the ball very quickly, but he has a little bit of a problem with injury. I think defensive line, Auburn's okay. I think they're going to be extremely strong on the defensive line.
Let's talk about that secondary, though, real quick. You said, I will give you that they definitely got burnt quite a bit last year, but I have to wonder if maybe that was a result of the scheme that was being run somewhat, and somewhat as a result of inexperience as well. But I think there's a lot of guys in that secondary that are poised to have big years. Chris Davis is a guy I would keep an eye on, very talented player, had some injury issues last year. T. Bell, another guy I would look out for, had some injuries, may or may not be good to go to start the season. Robinson Therese, a guy whose name you may be learning here a little bit, a hard hitter who it's taken him some time to get used to being lined up in the right place and trying to use his mind a little bit more, but by some accounts he's starting to pick up on that. And then at the safety positions, you'll see a guy who was playing cornerback but has been moved to safety, Jermaine Whitehead, who is another very talented player, very cerebral player. I don't know. I think I got to disagree with you here on this one. I think the secondary could become somewhat of a strong point for this defense this year.
I don't know. I think especially early they're going to struggle. And you hit on it a little bit earlier. In a new defense, you've got new plays being called in from the sideline, new positions that you have to be in. And Auburn struggled in being in the right defenses last year, in the right position. So I think they have potential to struggle early here. And one of the reasons that secondaries are out of position a lot of the times is because they're trying to make up for a weak point on their defense. And the weak point for Auburn right now is their linebacking core. So a lot of times you can get burnt deep when you're trying to help a linebacker cover his area. So
right.
I don't know. I think there's a big potential to get burnt early. They'll probably get better as they go on, but I'm just wondering if it's going to be too little too late.
Yeah, definitely. I think the theme with Auburn is unproven quantities. And that's kind of ironic because a lot of the same guys are playing this year that were playing last year, but they were playing in different systems. So it's kind of been a fresh start for everybody, see who catches on. And by all accounts, these new systems require a lot more thought than the old systems. You could say they're more complex, more NFL-type systems on both sides of the ball. So that, maybe a different kind of player excels in those systems than in the previous year's systems. So a lot of question marks on both sides. Things could go really right or really wrong. As I mentioned before, I think one place you don't have to worry about for Auburn is special teams. I think they're going to be excellent in all facets of special teams this year.
Yes, and that's the complete polar opposite of Alabama. They are proven they're good, and I think they have no worries on special teams. I think that'll probably be a strength.
Yeah, both place kicker Cody Parkey and the punter Stephen Clark, some of the best in the SEC. The return games for Auburn have been pretty good. Coverage has been pretty good. That was something that always worried me in the Tommy Tuberville era, was the special teams, and at the beginning of Gene Chiswick's tenure as well. But for the past couple of years, special teams have been very solid for Auburn. And when you get in those close games, which Auburn has a habit of doing, special teams can make all the difference for you. So at least one pretty sure thing there for Auburn. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes here, David. I know we got some disagreements on how the schedule is going to shake out here. Let's go ahead and get into that schedule. Of course, Auburn opening up with that matchup in the Chick-fil-A Kickoff Classic against Clemson. After that, they have to go to Mississippi State, a tough road game in Starkville. Then they get Louisiana Monroe at home, followed by LSU at home, then Arkansas at home. Then a little bit of a breather, traveling to Ole Miss and to Vanderbilt, followed by Texas A&M at home for the first time, then New Mexico State at home, followed by Georgia at home, a tune-up game the next week at home against Alabama A&M, and then, of course, the Iron Bowl in Tuscaloosa this year. Not the worst SEC schedule, not the best SEC schedule, but what do you think? How do you see that one shaking out, David?
I see him struggling early. A young team with a new system. I see him losing to Clemson, losing to LSU, losing to Arkansas. I've got him losing to Vandy. You know I'm high on Vandy this year. Losing to Georgia and losing to Alabama, which would put it at 6 and 6.
All right, so some could say that's a pretty realistic prediction. I might be a little bit more unrealistic with mine. I don't know, but based on some of the things I've been seeing and some of the other factors with some of the other teams, I've actually predicted 9-3 for Auburn, with losses to LSU, Alabama, and I think I mentioned last week my surprise loss, Texas A&M. I just got a bad feeling about that one, but I'm not quite so scared about Clemson, since they don't necessarily know what Auburn's trying to do, number one, and number two, Sammy Watkins is going to be out for that entire game, which was my chief concern. There was no way Auburn could cover him last year, so they don't have to worry about him this year. Plus, after the beating that Clemson took in their bowl game last year, I'm just not really sold on Clemson like a lot of other people are. Arkansas, Bobby Petrino's not there. We've talked about that one. I'm not quite so worried about that. Vanderbilt, I'll give you that. That's a potentially tough game at Vandy, and one that I think Auburn could get caught up in if they're not careful. Georgia game, another good choice for a loss. I'm predicting a very close game, but you got Georgia at home. I think that can help. Alabama and LSU, I think, are probably too talented for Auburn to be able to realistically compete with this year, but I don't know. 6 and 6, man. I feel like that's a little harsh. Just a little harsh.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing is Arkansas. I just don't trust their secondary. I think Arkansas is going to splice a new one. Clemson, even without Sammy Watkins, has a really terrific passing game. And then Georgia, I think, is just too talented. And the Vandy, I'm just high on them this year. So we'll see. I mean, I think this has been the most we just agreed about a team, so that's pretty interesting. But, Kenny, what do you think the 3 keys for Auburn is going to be this year?
I'm glad you asked. 3 big questions for Auburn this year. Number 1, the offensive line. Those guys have got to gel and gel very quickly. Number 2, linebackers. We've talked about that, especially Jake Holland. He is the key to this offense, or to that defense. There's very little behind him as far as other players. He's got to be the guy. He's got to stay healthy. He's got to make the right calls. And number 3 is Kyle Frazier. Can he develop into the leader and especially the passing threat that Auburn is going to need to be successful? What do you think?
Well, I agree with you on the passing game. They have got to establish a passing game. They don't. People are going to do just what they did last year